Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Last week, we had some friends of ours on the podcast, Raj and Gabby Sundra. They were talking about an awesome thing they do. They have 12 wedding vows that they created together when they got married. And they take those 12 wedding vows, and every month throughout the year, they will focus on one of those wedding vows together as a couple. So they'll do things like every morning during that month, they'll read that vow together, and then they'll try to incorporate the theme of that vow into their daily life throughout the entire month. So it's like a remembrance thing. So they were giving us an example, I think in the month of August for them, they have a wedding vow around like loving and honoring the extended family. Like Raj says, I love and honor your extended family, Gabby. And so all month, like they focus on really expressing love to the other person's extended family, you know, their mom, their dad, their siblings, things of this nature. And they reinforce this, and they spend the whole month doing that. And Tony and I were talking, we thought, what a great idea. That is such a fascinating exercise. And we were talking with them on the podcast, and you and I, Antonia, afterward, like sat down and were like, well, let's look over our wedding vows, and maybe we can like find some themes per month to do some of these same ideas. And so we want to talk about that today on the podcast. We want to talk about wedding vows. We want to talk about you as a couple sustaining your relationship, maintaining it, like proactively maintaining it. So it's not like you're fixing problems, but I'm saying like a lot, aren't I? You are proactively working on making sure both of you are showing up as your best selves. I think this is an awesome idea. Yeah,
well, what's crazy is that when we decided to sit down with our vows and determine whether or not we could turn them into a, vow of the month style devotional, I realized I hadn't actually read the vows since we got married. I haven't gone back and revisited them. And that's even more crazy because I actually wrote a blog post on the Personality Hacker blog. I wrote a blog post that I printed my vows on I published my vows on the blog. So they've been available to anytime I wanted to look them up. They were right there. I didn't have to go dig them out of a pile of papers anywhere. I've had them up on the blog. And I still hadn't read them since I posted that blog post. And so what's great about this concept is it's a reminder to revisit what you promised originally. Now, if you didn't write your own vows, if you're married or if you're in a committed relationship and you haven't yet written vows to each other, if you're not at that place in your relationship, obviously you don't want to start vowing things that just to have a couple's exercise. But if you are in a place of a committed relationship, if you're married or if you've pair bonded and you've decided that this is the person you're going to spend your life with, then having these vows really solidifies in your mind what exactly it is that you're promising in this arrangement. What is it that I have decided that I'm going to give to you as a promise that I'm not going to go back on? And if you haven't done this already, we highly recommend you spend some time talking about it with each other, then going either separately to write your individual vows or to write them together. Either way, we really recommend that you go through this exercise because, first thing, you might actually be promising different things to each other, which you and I did, Joel. We wrote our vows separately and then came together. We had conversation about it. So there are themes that show up in each of our individual vows.
Yeah.
But you have 15 of them and I have 12. So obviously our vows are a little different. The same themes came up, and yet there were still promises that we made to each other that were slightly different. So my set of vows to you is a little different than your set of vows to me. My promises to you are slightly different than your promises to me. And so knowing exactly what it is you promised me and remembering what those vows are and keeping ourselves accountable to them, I think is a really powerful exercise.
And I love the idea of keeping ourselves accountable. Like you can see my vows. I have mine in a Google Doc right now. I haven't publicly published mine yet. I may in the future do that or not. I'm not sure how I want to approach that. But what's great about that is the responsibility shouldn't be like in the middle of something, like an argument. You say to me, well, you promised such and such in our vows on our wedding. It should be me that's doing that. Say in the middle of a heated conversation, I'm starting to maybe be disrespectful to you. Let's say I've got a vow around respect and honoring and cherishing you. I need to be catching myself saying, wait a minute, that's not what I promised this relationship's going to be like. I didn't want resentment to fester. I don't want to disrespect. I made a commitment that I'm not going to do that. So I need to catch myself in the midst of it. I think that's what you mean by like holding ourselves accountable, is like literally yourself accountable to what you've promised, not like picking on the other person. Because that's so easy to do, I think, in life, is to always throw and cast out blame to someone else of the problem happening or whatever in that scenario.
That was actually a promise that both of us made, is that we wouldn't weaponize information. And you and I both separately made that vow that we would not weaponize what we know about each other. And essentially, like you said, pointing out where the other person is failing it can be turned into a weapon. So that piece of being accountable to your own vows, I think, is a really important point.
Yeah. So I don't want to sit here and like read through our vows that we did, because mine's a couple pages. It's separated into like 15 different little sections and little paragraphs into that. Yours is, I think, a couple pages, page and a half, 2 pages, something of that nature. I think that would be boring for you listening, for us to literally read through all of our vows.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to read mine, you can just go to the blog post.
Sure.
If you go to personalityhacker.com and put in the search field wedding vows, it will pop up and you'll be able to read mine.
What's interesting about our wedding, I don't know if you know this, we were in the state of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania here in the United States. Just give you, like, paint a little picture of how we got married. I think it's an interesting story. We decided to go to the courthouse and file for a marriage license, and we found out while we were at the courthouse that Pennsylvania, I think, is one of 2 states. It might be the only state.
Yeah, it's the only state
that allows what's called a Quaker wedding. And I mean, that's like a nickname for it, but it's basically what it is it's a wedding where you don't have to have an officiant, because in the Quaker religion, they don't really have pastors or ministers that are full-time clergy. They're just lay people in the Quaker system of religion, I guess. So there's the Pennsylvania state law that provides for this religion to express a marriage, meaning that there's no requirement to have like a full-time minister or officiant do the ceremony. So we filed paperwork to do what's called a Quaker wedding. We went to, and at the time we'd had our daughter Piper, so she was with us obviously, and the 2 of us just went to a quiet spot together outside in nature, and we basically married ourselves. Like, we didn't have to have an officiant, and we kind of do things offbeat and a little bit different. So we picked a really beautiful graveyard on the top of a hill overlooking a beautiful fall scene. It was kind of a rainy day, and the leaves had turned, and we were up there together. And it was a very romantic, intimate time of sharing these vows with each other. And basically, like, it's really no one else's business that we got married. It was very personal, very, closed. It was private. It was intimate. And we were able to marry ourselves because of this awesome law in the state of Pennsylvania that you can basically not have to have a whole, the whole wedding thing going down with the officiant and all that stuff. So yeah. It was really an interesting experience for me. And I love the fact that we decided how marriage is going to serve us, and not we're going to serve this institution that's been propped up. We said, we're in love. We want to be together. We want to be married. We want to make it official. We want to do it on our terms. Like, this is to serve us and our relationship. And I really love that about how we went about getting married, just in a practical structural stance.
Yeah. Not in a self-congratulatory way, but more in like ooh, cool, we were able to do this.
Yeah, sort of I just thought it was like, it's a neat story. If I was listening, I'd want to hear that story. So I thought I'd tell you.
And in the Quaker wedding arrangement, you do have to have signatures of people that indicate that they vow that you are married. And so later on, we had family members sign it. And according to Pennsylvania, if there's a question about your marriage, the burden of proof is on you that you definitely got married. I don't know if it's ever come up. and I guess if it comes up, then we'll have to, the burden of proof will be on us that we actually married each other. But I loved the intimacy of it as well. And I liked that we went to the cemetery because, I mean, I don't remember whose idea it was. I think it feels a little macabre sometimes to people to say, yeah, we actually got married in a cemetery. And some people just like they think it's cool because they just like the drama of it. But we chose it not for its drama. We chose it specifically to remind ourselves of how short life is. That when we're committing to each other and the commitments that we're making are based on our desire to spend our lives together. Like we get one ride through this life, and who you choose to go, to do that ride with is a pretty important decision. And so we wanted to remind ourselves that this wasn't lip service. Like you said, we weren't serving an institution. We actually want to travel through life together, and we want to remind ourselves of the big picture, that it's not going to be forever. And most of our vows were around protecting our good relationship, protecting the happiness that this relationship has the potential to give us. And so the cemetery wasn't just a macabre or cool or, ironic statement. It was specifically like, pretty soon we're going to be in one of those, and one of those granite headstones is going to be above us. And exactly how was it that we wanted to live our lives before that happens? And it gave us some really good perspective on how, just exactly what it is that we're promising to each other.
I've always loved graveyards. They've always given me a sense of like, when I'm thinking through life choices and things, I like to go to a graveyard to do it sometimes, because it's so clear that this is my ultimate, this is where I'm headed. This is my destination. And it becomes very real that like I'm alive, I'm vibrant right now. I have power and choice and the ability to make life how I want to make it. Until the day that stone is over my head, I have options. Mm-hmm. And I love that perspective of saying like, I'm not there yet. I'm not in this ground right here with the stone over my head. I've got infinite possibilities until that day. And it also makes you very sober-minded, because it's going to come so much faster than we expect. Yeah. All of us. I mean, we're all, on a long enough timeline, the survival rate drops to 0.
Right.
And that's for everyone. You listening, that's going to come for you someday. We don't mean to get so like down so quick about like death or anything, but when you really have a sense of your mortality, a true sense of your mortality. And we see young people, when I was young, when I was like 22, I think I'm going to die. I thought it abstract, but it wasn't like hitting me hard. The older you get, the more this becomes a real thing to you. And the more you start to take your choices more seriously and also more lightly. Oddly enough, like you start to really hold on to things less, because you realize they don't really matter in the end of it all. Yeah,
you stop sweating the small stuff, and at the same time, you get serious about your responsibilities. And so, one thing that we recommend is when you are, if you choose to write wedding vows or commitment vows for your pair bond partner and yourself, we recommend that you do so in a place that helps you gain that perspective. So for us, it was a cemetery that helped us gain perspective. And again, not in a macabre way, in more of a, oh yeah, this shit's real. Like, this is not like a surface thing. This is definitely something that is incredibly important to us, and we're making a massive commitment. Whatever that context is for you, make sure that when you're writing your vows, you've got the right mind frame. You've got the right perspective. You're in a good setting for this activity. And so that's one of our recommendations, should you choose to accept this exercise. We noticed that there was a lot of themes. Again, we're not going to read all of our vows, but we're going to share some of the themes of our vows to give you a starting point, or maybe something that will help trigger what kinds of vows you might want to write for yourself. One of the interesting things that came up for both of us was a commitment to health and nutrition. We chose to see health and nutrition as a way to symbolize the gift we're giving to each other of our bodies. So to maintain sexual attraction, to maintain good health, so that, you mentioned in your vow, it was to maintain attractiveness and the ability to have adventures together.
Yeah.
For me, it was to continue to be physically desirable to you, and to show that I understand that my body is a gift that I give to you. So if I'm, for some reason, getting lazy, I guess, or, just not taking care of my health, I recognize that it's going to show up in a couple different ways. The first way it will show up is I will physically, like, my body and how I look will be the emergent of that. But that will just be a surface indication of bigger problems that are brewing internally, which means if I'm not committed to my health and nutrition and wellness, I might actually shorten my lifespan. So I rob you of years of life that we could have had together if I die young based on my choices. Now, obviously, I am going to die based on my choices. Like, I'm doing something that's going to kill me right now, but I'm doing my best to be aware of those and to make sure that I'm taking care of my health so that I am both physically desirable and attractive to you, and also I will be extending our journey together.
Yeah, or, imagine, like, if you smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, you're probably going to be in your 60s or 70s developing lung cancer. And now for the last 10, 15 years of our lives together, you're sick and dying, and I'm taking care of you. Not that I wouldn't want to take care of you, but it would be, you're robbing us of potential adventures together in the golden years of our life. Like, we would not be able to do those adventures now because you're sickly and you're dying of cancer or something.
Right.
So realizing that it's more than just what you're after as a person, there's a bigger stake at play here. Like, it's our relationship, it's both of us, it's the gift you're giving to me and me giving to you and things of this nature.
Yeah, I would be robbing both quality and quantity.
Yeah.
Like, I could be literally, if I make choices like that, I could be robbing us of a decade of life together. I could be dying young. But then, as you mentioned, the time that we have together towards the end is also far less quality. So again, I mean, I'm probably going to die of something that I'm making choices around right now. I mean, who knows? Maybe the radiation from my laptop is going to give me ovarian cancer or something. But for the most part, but I don't know that to be true. But if I know something is toxic, or if I know something like the nutrition level of my food, I understand that there is a huge difference in nutrition levels. So the higher quality food I eat, the more likely I am to extend my life. That's not always a sure thing, obviously. There are plenty of people who eat extremely well and then still have, I don't know, like a family predisposition or genetic predisposition towards, a disease that they can't do anything about. But as long as the power is within, my control, as long as I have the power to, I'm going to think of that as a gift I give to you. So I don't just have the selfish right to do whatever I want to. I have to take you and my commitment to you into account.
I think another big piece of both of our vows was this notion of supporting each other in personal growth. Both of us ended up coming back to the table after we had some conversation, we went off and wrote our vows, we came back, and both of us have a lot of language. Both of us have a lot of language in our vows that deal with, look, you're going to be growing as a person. It might make me feel uncomfortable at times. It might be weird for me. I might have to put some of my desires aside in the midst of your growth, and then you put your desires aside for my growth, and we might have to go back and forth there. But we're committed to a growth relationship. We're committed to having you grow and me grow, and we'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. Like, we're really committed to that as a couple. I think that's a powerful frame because we don't want to just synthetically hinder the other person's growth because we're not ready to grow. Like, I'm nervous about this growth thing that she's got to do. I'm going to just go ahead and hijack her growth because I can't deal with it, when you're totally ready to do it. And I think that is a framework that we come from that can be scary at times. It can be challenging, but it is definitely a value of us as a couple. It's a value that came from both of us that we really want to express that growth frame for each other.
Yeah, well, and actually my very first vow in my set is that if you start to stagnate, I'm going to push you.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that I'm going to support your growth, that if I see that for some reason you're stagnating in your growth, then I feel it's my responsibility to start pushing you. And in my vow, I request the same from you. So my vow is a request that you make sure that I never stagnate, that we are making sure that we are always trying to hit the next level. And that was something that was important to both of us, is that we be accountable to each other's growth and to our own growth, and to be massively supportive. And then on top of that, one of my vows is that because I know that you're a dynamic creature and that you're always growing, I'm not going to assume that you should behave a certain way because you've always behaved that way. Like, I recognize that your behavior is going to change based on your development and growth. So if you start behaving in a way that I'm not used to, one of my vows is that I'm not going to get upset with you about that. I'm going to recognize that you are changing and that your behavior is going to follow your internal progress, and to hold space for that and to not get resentful, say, if you're behaving in a way that could be called quote unquote inconsistent. But I'm not looking for consistency. I'm looking for development. We marry a person for who they are, not for what they do. And if you're getting married to somebody for what they do, that's a red flag. You need to be concerned about that, because we don't do the same thing now that we did 10 years ago, and we're not going to be doing the same thing 10 years from now that we do today. So if you're marrying a person because of what they do, the actions they have, how they're showing up to the world, you may be drastically disappointed when those change, because who we are is dynamic, let alone what we do, right? Like, already just who we are changes and flexes over time. We become different versions of ourselves, and our behaviors change wildly. I mean, I think about all the things I do now that 10 years ago I'd be like, man, I can never even perspective shift into seeing myself being that type of person now that would do these things. And I'm sure in another 10 years that's going to change again. So it's that fluidity, that dynamic ability. One of my vows that I put into this, and I forget if it's a crossover between us, it was an ethic. I remember we had a lot of conversation, like, even around should we get married. And I kept saying, society tells you that this piece of paper,
Because all this is a legally piece of paper. Like, it's constructed out of our minds. Like, we just invented as humans, right, to have this piece of paper that says we're married. I had a lot of resistance to this because I had been married before, and I had a piece of paper, and I'd gone and done all the right channels. It had the wedding and the ceremony and, the traditional type vows, like death do us part type vows. And it didn't work out real well. And it was like structurally set up, and I felt like I was in servitude to this entity. And I thought, I don't know if I want to get married again because it removes the personal element. I would much rather get up every morning and affirm my love to you, like daily. Like, that's every day we make a commitment. At the end of the day, we could decide, okay, we're not going to be together anymore. I think that panics people, like, oh God, it could be over at any moment. But to me, that's so empowering because then it's like you both want to be there, and you like feel free to not be there. And so you're like empowered to, I said like again, look at that. You are empowered to, basically affirm your love for each other and your commitment to each other on a daily basis. So one of the vows that was really important for me to write in was this idea of presentness. And in the vow, I basically say, I'll paraphrase, but it's basically like, we don't live in the future. We don't live in the past. It doesn't matter I married you a few years ago and we said some things then. I live today. And I want to affirm my love and intention to be with you daily. That's important for me to do. To say, look, I love you, Antonia. I want to be with you today. It's not because I made a commitment 10 years ago in front of a group of people that I'm staying here. No, that doesn't matter to me. It matters that I got up this morning, I looked over at you, and I said, this is the love of my life. I'm so excited to be with you today. Let's go on another adventure together. And I think that idea of presentness is so important to me that I wanted it to be in our vows together, because it dealt with this idea of not serving an institution, but making it fit for us as a relationship.
I think when you're writing vows, keeping in mind that it's always a commitment. It's like a daily commitment that you're making. I think that gives a little bit of latitude too in not making your vows like the most uber vows ever, not having to think about everything that you would want to write into it. I think revisiting your vows and even being willing to make changes to them if the context says that, I committed to doing this thing, but you and I recognize that we had to commit to that because that was actually us at a lower level of development. And now that we're at a higher level of development, or now that we've been growing so much, maybe we need to revisit that one because I don't really feel as committed to that piece as I did before. And then establishing new vows based on your growth. I think a major theme that I see in really successful relationships is the ability to have space for this flux, this growth, this change, recognizing that nothing stays the same. We're always evolving and adapting to our circumstances and to what life, the challenges that life throw at us and the things we've learned from those challenges. Being willing to modify if modification is appropriate for the relationship, and then checking in on a regular basis to make sure that the other person agrees. Like, they're like, no, I still want to commit to that other thing. And it's like, okay, well, cool. You can commit to that with me, and then I'll commit to something else with you. And is that okay? I think really what these vows do, and especially a regular revisitation of them, is it really helps us keep our finger on the pulse of how the relationship is doing. It doesn't let you rest on your laurels or stagnate. Like, you really have to be conscientious and thoughtful about this. And it's a regular revisitation to the thing you were the most conscious and thoughtful about. So I love this idea of vows and revisiting them and talking about them and rehashing them and maybe even rewriting them at a certain point and remembering what it is I actually committed to you. Like, one of the things I wrote in my vows was that I'm going to resolve conflict early. I vowed to you, like, as a promise, as wrapped up into my love for you and my vow to you to spend, as much of this life together as we possibly can. Part of that vow is quick, swift conflict resolution. So if I'm harboring resentment against you, if I've decided to be fussy and pouting, and if I allow, say, myself to go to bed that night still upset with you, or if I allow myself to be mad at you for a couple days or sleeping on the couch because I'm upset, I'm actually dishonoring my wedding vow that said resolve conflict quickly. And you wrote in your wedding vows to me that you would never, we call it hang up the phone or slam the door. That's a signal that the other person has decided that they are not going to allow conflict resolution, that they're going to allow this thing to just hang. And in conflict resolution, you need both people to be cooperative back and forth talking about what's going on.
Yeah.
And so in your vow, you said, I'm never going to hang up the phone. I'm never going to slam the door. Like I will always keep the lines of communication open so that we can resolve these things. And in my vow was, I'm going to do it swiftly. So even though you and I wrote a vow separately, how we fight is a part of our vows to each other. How we choose to go about conflict and conflict resolution. That was written into our vows, that we're not going to slam the door, that we're not going to allow things to fester, that we're going to be swift in our resolution. And I think you and I have done a really good job of honoring that vow.
I agree. I think we've had challenges like anyone else in relationship. I mean, if you are in a committed, loving pair bond relationship, conflict is inevitable. And I think that people that never fight in romance probably don't have a very close relationship. Because anytime you become close to somebody, you start triggering all those intimate parts of you that are like, wait a minute, my ego's coming up, or this thing's a problem for me. And if conflict is inevitable, then thinking about how you're going to deal with conflict early before it arises is something that would really be helpful to you as a couple. Thinking through, okay, we are going to have conflict. What are the rules of engagement in our relationship? How do we deal with conflict? Do we allow things to stack? And some people, have more. I think we have a lot of principle-based vows, like in principle, like we're going to not hang up the phone. Some people get real specific, like I'm never going to let the sun set on the day. I'm never going to go to bed that night. I will always resolve conflict before I go to bed that night or whatever. Ours is like resolve early, whatever early is interpreted for us, right? It might be in the next 5 minutes. It might be during that day. It might be during that week if it's impossible to talk that day or whatever. But you might get really specific with yours. I would say principle-based vows, though, probably are helpful because they give you a lot of flexibility in interpretation to that. It's more of the intent of it. And I think that's really where we came from in how we wrote ours specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these principles are really good. And like you said, the doing it principally based allows for a little bit of latitude in how it gets interpreted. That can be difficult if you've got, some conflict and the other person, again, is weaponizing it and going, you're not honoring your vow to me. But of course, you never want to get to that point in the relationship. I mean, you might want to even write that into your vows like we did. We both said we refuse to weaponize. And actually, what I wrote in mine was that I will do my best not to weaponize. The other thing I tried to do was create a little bit of like space for my imperfection. Like these are my ideals. These are the vows that I would like to be, honoring all the time. And I'm imperfect and I'm probably going to jack it up. And one of the things I wrote into my vows was a request that you hold space for my imperfection. That if I'm going to do my best to recognize when emotions are stacking. But I know that I let emotions stack. I know it's a weakness of mine. It's a challenge that I'm always working on. So I wrote into my vow, and if I do let something stack, if that does happen, because it's probably going to happen, I request that you be patient with me while I work through it, and I'll do everything I can as soon as I recognize that I'm doing it. So written into our vows is a little bit of latitude and a little bit of grace for ourselves that, hey, I'm not going to be great on this all the time, and so can you help me out here? One thing I thought was interesting as well about a theme that came up for both of us is we both promised to each other transparency while stating that we're going to honor the other person's privacy. So both of us separately made a vow to give the other person something that we're not requiring back. Now, it's interesting that we both made that vow. So we are actually transparent with each other. But we both said we're interdependent human beings. We're fully independent on our own, and we're choosing to go through this life together. And as such, you have a right to privacy. Now, I'm going to gift you with my transparency. I'm going to gift you with being as open as possible with everything that I have. And I'm not going to demand that transparency back. So I thought that was an interesting thing that got written in, was this idea that I'm going to give something that I'm not going to require you to give back to me. And yet we both promised it, so we both are transparent. But even if you decided that that wasn't a vow you were going to give to me, I would be okay with that. I'm going to gift you with transparency, and I'm not going to require full transparency back. I'm going to honor your privacy. And so far, that hasn't been an issue. Neither of us have had anything that we've had to be private about or, don't ask me about that. And at the same time, neither of us is snoopy. I know all of your passwords all of your, probably. I know where I can find them anyway. I don't actually know them because I don't have them memorized. But I know that there's a place that I can go find all your passwords. I've never gone into your email to read it, ever. I've never gone into any of your social media accounts to read them. I've never gone to Facebook to read your private messages. There's just really no reason for me to go snoop that way. And I know you've never done that to me. You've never gone and snooped. And yet, were I to ask you, hey, can I go read your private messages? You'd be like, yeah, sure, no problem. And vice versa. If you asked for those passwords from me, I'd be like, yeah, my passwords are this, so go for it. And I think that what that vow did is it allowed us to have trust and respect at the same time. We trust each other and we respect each other. We trust that the other person is not doing anything behind our backs. And yet, were they to do that, we know we could go, we have full freedom to go check that out. But I respect you enough that why would I assume that? I'm not going to assume a problem if there is no problem. I think I love the fact that you and I both made that promise to each other without realizing we were going to make that promise to each other. Without, it was a gift. These are gifts I give to you. And just like any gift giving, I'm not demanding you give me the same gift back. You just happen to. So I think when you're writing your vows, not just expecting everything you write to be fully reciprocal. Like when I'm vowing to you, I'm not vowing to you because I want that vow to come back to me. Like I'm not writing what I want you to be doing for me. I'm writing specifically what I'm committing to do for you.
Yeah. And I think that takes a lot of trust and faith in the other person. And if you don't have that kind of trust and faith in the other person, and you're at the beginning of that formalized relationship, you might want to think through, do I really want to enter into a relationship where I can't feel that kind of trust or faith? And, each relationship's different. Each person is different. You're going to have a different experience of this. And at the same time, I love the idea, and I would encourage you. I think the big guiding principle here is that you get to decide this for yourself, and you get to be proactive and intentional with how you enter into a relationship. I think that's really the key takeaway from today's podcast, this show. I mean, these are the specifics of how our vows show up for us. Yours is going to be different, obviously. And you might have already committed to a relationship 10 years ago. You did the traditional marriage thing maybe, or you're in a long-term pair bond relationship. You didn't get married, but you guys committed to each other and you're with each other. And Tony and I were talking earlier, we were actually inspired by Raj and Gabby, how they theme something every month and they set intentions around their relationship proactively. We're going to sit down and go through the year and we're going to set a month intention each month and we're going to practice this. I think this is a great exercise. And I think it's a great exercise like once a month to review these with each other, like our vows together and what we intended and what we have intentions set for. I think it will be clarifying. It's almost like the constitution of your marriage type thing. Like every organization, every country has like a constitution that guides it. And this is something that your marriage, it's not just a static thing you said years ago that holds true now. It's a living document. It's a living way of being. It's a living way of expressing yourself to your mate, to the person you want to be with, that you're in love with. And it's intentional. It's real. It's dynamic. It's present. It's here and now. And just imagine that one tweak of making your commitment to each other live every day. How that alone changes the framework of your entire relationship. How that just gives it such intention, such purpose, and such meaning, and such richness. And you get to catch things before they fester and get really bad. So these are some ideas we have. Do you feel complete on this topic? I mean, do you have anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up? Because I feel like this is complete, and I want to admonish, give people the encouragement to go and try this exercise with themselves.
Yeah, I know. I think I feel pretty complete. The only thing is just to reiterate what I love about these exercises, even if you don't choose to do, say, like a wedding vow or devotional of the month, is to use an exercise like this, even if it's not specifically this one, to be super thoughtful about crafting what it is that you've promised in this relationship. Not to just let relationships have a default setting. Not to let your relationship just be on autopilot, basically, or an autoresponder system. To actually be conscientious and thoughtful about what it is that you are promising to this other individual. So that's why I love this exercise, is the thoughtfulness that goes into it. And anytime you do anything thoughtful, some stuff is going to come up for you. It's going to shine a light in dark places. It's going to reveal things to you that you might not have thought about before. And that there might even be, like a conflict in what you guys believe is important to vow to each other. And then it will encourage conversation around that and maybe head off at the pass something that would have been a major problem later. You're actually able to get some resolution around it now. So that's one of the reasons why I love this exercise of making these vows and then keeping them fresh in mind.
What do you think? What kind of vows did you do in your wedding if you're in a committed relationship? Or how have you crafted this? Do you do this on a daily basis? Is this something that's static for you? Is it dynamic? What are your thoughts? Think this is a bunch of bullshit? Do you like this idea? Let us know. Like, come over to personalityhacker.com. Underneath this podcast, there's an area for you to leave a comment, question, feedback. And we want you to be a part of this conversation. It's important that your voice is heard. So come over and leave a comment. Be a part of the conversation. You can also find a community of like minds, people just like you, that's growing daily over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and other various Android platforms. And if you are in a giving mood, please feel free to leave a review on iTunes, a rating and review for this podcast, since that actually really helps us out. So it helps us out because iTunes uses rating and reviews as part of their algorithm for cross-promoting our podcast and other people's podcasts, and gives us higher ratings in the charts. So if you are in a spirit of reciprocity and would like to give the gift of leaving a rating and review, we'd be very appreciative.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.